The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs. Ellipsis Labs is building a world where mainstream finance happens on-chain. Their first product, Phoenix, is a fully on-chain limit order book DEX on Solana doing hundreds of millions of dollars in volume. I know this team personally. It's one of the strongest in the space. If you're interested in working with a team that's here to stay, Ellipsis Labs is hiring engineers passionate about DeFi to join their team. You can find Ellipsis Labs on Twitter at ellipsis_labs or head to ellipsislabs.xyz to learn more and apply. Hey guys, we're here today with Stefan Gosselin, one of the foremost thinkers probably in the world of MEV, and now has moved on to a number of new projects. Stefan, welcome. You care to introduce yourself?
Hello. Yeah, super excited to be here. It's been a little while since I've done the podcast circuit, and so it's always a good time to see sort of what the meta of the conversation is. And there's no better place to do so than here. You're tapped into the stream, sir. And so I'm excited to do this. Yeah, introduction for myself. I don't know. I build stuff in Web3, and I've been doing that for a while. And when I started, I was couch surfing and poor, and somehow I, over time, was able to have an impact on the industry, which I'm super grateful that I was able to do. Yeah, I mean, we can get into any stage of my journey through it, up to what I'm working on now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So maybe just like, what was your intro into Web3? I mean, we're gonna go all into MEV, obviously, but like maybe just like your intro into Web3 and how quickly you moved into sort of like the highest level problems, if you will.
So I came into Web3 actually through smart contract security. This was back in 2017. I went to a conference called IC3, which is at Cornell. It had sort of all the top researchers from US universities that were looking at blockchains. And sort of the early, maybe like second phase of the Ethereum community, like core dev folks were there. So this was 1 year after the DAO hard fork. And so it was kind of like the folks that are relevant in that decision coming back together and saying, oh, what happened? It just so happened that same week, there was a parody multi-sig wallet hack, the first one. And that was a front-running hack. So basically, this attacker was going to each of the different wallets and trying to drain them one by one. And so everyone in the room that I was in sort of activated and got on their computers and then started coding bots to front run the attacker. And so this was, sort of my first exposure to smart contracts, first exposure to Ethereum, and then first exposure to MEV at the same time. I met a lot of the folks I ended up going and doing Flashbots with back then. And so, yeah, my journey was through smart contract security initially. Focused on that for a few years, started doing a lot of standards work, looking at sort of various different ERCs around token issuances. I worked on smart contract security tokens, which I guess now are called RWAs. And I believe some of them are still using the standard that I wrote. That's something I need to verify maybe before I make the claim. After that, I left and I worked at a company called Numerai. So we were doing sort of, I guess, AI X crypto before AI X crypto was popular, doing crowdsourcing of data models for stock market prediction, and running a hedge fund on top of it. And that was actually my first exposure to building end user applications. And so in 2019, built this thing called Erasure, and Erasure Bay. There's this data crowdsourcing thing that was fully serverless, fully Web3, and way ahead of its time because like everyone was still using Ethereum just to transfer ETH between exchanges back then. So I've been working on like the entire stack, even prior to doing the Flashbots stuff. The Flashbots stuff was obviously a lot of fun and the depth of MEV. And now I'm finally sort of resurfacing to a level that I care about a lot, which is improving user experience on Web3 and actually bringing Web3 to a lot of people.
Yeah, and you can go ahead and just like tell us what we'll come back to like some of that timeline, and also obviously thoughts on a lot of the time period that you just mentioned. But like, so what are you exactly working on now? Like where are you involved right now? Just for some context.
So for the past year and a half, I've been running a company called Frontier Research. And this is an independent research organization. We just publish blog posts at frontier.tech. And then we also incubate projects. We incubate teams. So we've done a few things. We've done some block building for a little while. We incubated a Telegram trading bot with a team called Calibrio. This bot is called Alfred. It's really cool. It has like, you can talk to it and it does trades on your behalf on chain, which is just insane. So you can talk to the blockchain now. Anyways. And then the latest thing that we're spinning off is called OneBalance. So this is where really all my focus is nowadays. It's the problem of chain abstraction and how to get the entire industry to coordinate around the solution, which we believe is credible accounts.
Okay, great. Okay, so then like we can go back a little bit now. Like, what was the inspiration, or what was the impetus to found Frontier, and like what was your mission initially with that? Like in terms of the research you wanted to do, and like what was your initial goal there?
So I had spent a little time. The entire journey of Flashbots was asking a lot of questions, sort of going to the depth of Ethereum and mechanism designs behind these global blockchains, and asking a lot of questions that are sort of uncomfortable around centralization, censorship resistance, economic power, politics, all of these things. And I felt like my time there sort of, despite launching MEVGeth and launching MEVBoost, really just opened up more questions than it really answered. And I was looking for a venue to be able to have conversations around these questions. And so that was really the reason for Frontier Research. It was just a place where I could publish my ideas and explore topics that seemed interesting. I was lucky enough to have my research partner, Ankit, come on board super early on. And yeah, together we've just been exploring a bunch of different topics that are interesting to us.
Yeah. Okay. So Frontier has like sort of your, I guess, seminal piece. It's like called Infinite Games, I believe. And I think like the gist of this, the first time I read it was that, the idea is to expand the pie. I'm like being reductive here, but like this was the way that I interpreted this, right? Like if we're able to expand the aggregate amount of value being created, then maybe this is perhaps a better way to approach some of the problems that you saw in MEV. Like, would just now kind of getting into like, how would you distinguish this, or maybe how would you compare this to like how you felt MEV was approached before, and like where you thought like, okay, so like perhaps this was how we were looking at this, and maybe we should look at this from a expand the pie mentality.
So yeah, Infinite Games. I guess it's kind of like with a manifesto that I wrote and we posted. So if anyone wants to reach it, just go frontier.tech and it's at the top here. It sort of is maybe like a commentary piece, really on these two different diagrams. So I published this thing called the MEV supply chain when I was at Flashbots, and it was kind of like asking the question, are things going to centralize towards a few entities in the middle that are very big and doing a lot of stuff? Or are things going to, be more pushed towards or is value going to be pushed more towards the edges? And so, that's maybe the PBS question that a lot of people are asking now with block building. How many block builders are there going to be? How powerful are they going to be? What's the difference between a block builder and AVS? What's the difference between a block builder and a shared sequencer? What's the difference between a block builder and a decentralized sequencer? All questions that don't really have answers today, but they're sort of all extensions of this question. I think what I started to feel is that too much of the conversation was very doomer, And I think still to this day, a lot of the MEV conversation is extremely doomer and is sort of oriented on how is this, all the different ways in which this is terrible for everyone. And and it's not really the reason why I joined the space. I didn't start working in crypto because I, wanted to work on problems. I didn't want to work all day on things that were depressing. And so I wanted to frame a little bit the conversation from a lot of these sort of doomer questions and problems towards something that's a little bit more optimistic for everyone. And so, this manifesto sort of just has a very abstract segmentation of what are we doing in crypto, which is designing games between humans, right? We're all just humans trying to figure out how to be humans with other humans. And our way to do that is to create these games, whether they're social games or technical games, it doesn't really matter. And games are like a set of rules, as well as interaction between participants. And a lot of the observation is all these games in crypto are really two things. They sort of come down to the game players and mechanisms that are the actual games, and then message passing between the players. And so I sort of posit that the goal of Web3 as a whole is just to create games that are positive sum as a whole, and increasing the aggregate value that we're creating for all the users of these games. And so we have an increasing amount of complexity here that sort of evolved from the initial NEV boost game that we introduced. And that's fine so long as the aggregate value that's being produced is growing. And so it's a slight reshaping of the narrative to say it doesn't really matter where the distribution of capital is going, so long as the aggregate value for users is increasing. We're doing a good job.
Yeah. So, okay, getting a little bit into specifics now, I know you had voiced some concerns, two to 3 years ago now, regarding centralization. And we've now had 2 to 3 years, depending on how you kind of look at that timeline. And I want to know, have you felt that maybe if you want to talk about PBS and how it's played out, or if you want to talk about just your concerns about centralization and whether or not you think that those have come to fruition, or if you've changed your mind on some of those?
So I think all the predictions that I had around centralization were validated. I don't think there's anything that was invalidated. There's a very simple, maybe first principles argument for it. And we can take it from two ends. These are topics that I've really discussed much, so I'm excited to dive into it. So please challenge it as well as I describe it. So I sort of frame the MEV question as one of trying to figure out, is MEV fundamental to these systems or not? And the way that I sort of form an intuition around this is we could define MEV as being the willingness to pay of individuals to affect and sort of control the next state of the world that is agreed upon by everyone else that cares about it. The reason why I use this definition is because it's sort of a commentary on what blockchains are, right? Blockchains are just large groups of people that are coming to agreement on the next set of transactions that are going to go into a block, right? The next state transition. And so you have this global consensus game over defining the next state of the world, right? I sort of posit that the more people that you have that are in this game, that are participating in defining this next state of the world, by definition, the more MEV that there's going to be. And this is because the more people that you have, not just, the more individuals want to pay to be able to affect the next state of the world. Because maybe as an individual, I just care about my little transaction going in. I'm willing to just pay the gas for it. But there's going to be some entity out there that has a really, really high willingness to pay because they really care about the outcome that controls what all these people believe is the next state of the world. And so certain sub actors with a lot of resources, a lot of power, are going to be willing to pay a lot to affect that outcome. And in a way, it's kind of like, one could say like MEV should be given like a Nobel Peace Prize, because it's sort of developed this mechanism for contention over like the future to be resolved economically, as opposed to through violence or threat of violence, which is incredible. But there's another observation that says that, well, if we have these global games, the most well-resourced entities are always going to be the ones that control the outcomes. So I think that's a little bit the MEV question is like, are we happy with this? Is this sort of inevitable? Is there ways to design systems that don't behave in this way?
Yeah. Okay. That's like, I think that's good. Definitely good framing, like context wise. I want to ask then, and maybe we're getting like a little bit into like Ethereum specifically here, but you can obviously once again run with this however you want. Like if you look back on the design of PBS specifically, right? And like maybe if you want to give like a 15-second overview of how you view the design, or at the time in part helping to design it, what your thoughts were. Was this designed optimally? Like the reason I ask this too is because like this is still an ongoing conversation, right? Like every single day, nearly, like you see people arguing about whether PBS was like well designed, and there's like people who are like very certain that like their idea is much, much better, right? And so I mean, we've had some time now with this in place, and I'm curious, like if you look back, if you maybe want to, just like give us your thoughts now. And like, was this the best way? And like, if not, where would you have like made big changes in retrospect? And then I'll follow up.
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe my answer is just going to be an attempt at absolving myself of my own sins. So having played
that's fine. That's totally fine.
That's cool. Okay. It's the right place to do this. All right, great. So having played such a fundamental role in the development of MapBoost and the adoption of it, I can't help but like feel some level of responsibilities for the outcomes that it has on the space. And while I think like things have basically evolved in the way that we expected, if you like even reference back to Vitalik's endgame blog post, right? Like we knew that there was going to be a few block builders, and they were going to be like highly sophisticated, and they're going to do a lot of stuff across all the different jobs, all the different games that we design. I don't think that that's unexpected as an outcome. So I do believe everything sort of has progressed as expected. Now there's a separate question that says, is this the like future that we want? Is this the equilibrium that we want to reside in? And when I start to think of that question, I actually start to think that MEV boost or PBS is actually irrelevant to the question. MEV boost is just an efficient way to reach the logical outcome of a global consensus system, which is that you have highly well-resourced entities in a position of advantage in the informational game that is producing blocks for a blockchain. And what MapBoost does is it efficiently allocates the responsibilities to these parties, and makes the like output bids legible. Now, is MapBoost stable in and of itself? Like, I don't actually think MapBoost itself is a stable equilibrium from an incentive perspective, because there's a lot of incentives for greater integration between block builders and validators that I think is basically inevitable for them to take place. If I was to say like a controversial prediction, it would be that in a few years' time, or maybe even a year's time, and we won't even like be aware of it, there's going to be one block builder in the US, one block builder in Europe, and one block builder in Asia somewhere. And then all the validators on all those continents are just going to co-locate inside of the same servers, the same data centers as those block builders. And everyone's going to be doing like multi-block MEV to be able to like maximize the amount of CFI DeFi ARB that they're able to capture. And that's just sort of like the incentives that are created by the system, the way that it's run. And so is MEV Boost have or PBS have like any impact on this? I think not. I think it's an efficient way to like achieve the like end result. But the question of like, is that end result the one that we want, requires questions to be asked that are much more fundamental to the blockchains themselves, which I believe are actual like global consensus mechanisms good? And is there a way to design those things in a way that doesn't lead to this logical outcome? To which my reflection so far says no. If you have a global consensus game, this is the outcome that you arrive at. I haven't seen a convincing argument otherwise.
Like the gravity of that, I'm not trying to like blow this out of proportion, but like the gravity of that is actually like something that a lot of people, I think, within, like, I don't know, maybe the people who think deeply about like mechanism design and stuff have like some more an opinion more aligned with yours. But like, I think that's kind of interesting, like with regards to the idea of like a world computer, right? Like it is in many ways like a bit different than like the initial idea of having like this like massive distributed system where like anybody can broadcast a transaction and like anybody anywhere in the world can include this in a block or whatever. And yeah, it does seem like, okay, so like going off that, like what we kind of discussed a little bit, like this idea of like local consensus. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to riff on this global computer thing, world computer. It's like, who said that the world computer had to be a mainframe that only has like synchronous sequential execution, right? You could have a sharded global computer that has very different properties because it doesn't require the same level of synchronization on the global consensus. And so there's some specifics around the architecture of this system that you're describing that leads to different outcomes, not just the idea of there being a compute platform that can be accessed from anywhere.
Yeah, I guess maybe if I was to take like what I thought the initial idea maybe behind Ethereum was like this like massive global layer of transparency and execution. And like perhaps under your vision, this can still be feasible. I think more just like this overarching financial system that is one massive global state. Like maybe there was some unforeseen consequences of such an idea, but I would lean on, I guess what I would say is I would lean towards saying that was what I thought maybe the goal was. And I am probably more in agreement with you now that may not have to be the case. But like, so going off that, like we kind of discussed this idea of like local consensus. Like, what does this mean in practice?
Yeah. So if we say, okay, well, global consensus seems to lead to these games that are capturable, right? And like, yeah, maybe the idea of Ethereum was to build this global computer, but like now we kind of realize, okay, well, this global computer can kind of be captured by economic actors. They're acting rationally, right? And so there's like a bunch of different ways in which like system doesn't work. And like my thesis again is the global part of it is kind of the issue. Whereas if you have more local games that allow for individuals to operate with other individuals to achieve the things that they want to achieve without exposing their data, intents, transactions, economic rights, whatever, to the entire set of the world's population, it's probably like not creating as much of an incentive for people to come manipulate. I guess like a canonical example would be like, no one really gives a shit what this like tribe in the middle of the Amazon is like deciding on like, their allocation of resources, right? Because they're playing a local game that isn't connected to this globalism game that, the rest of the world is kind of engaged in. And so that thing is like a consensus model that's living somewhere. There's a group of people that are figuring out how to live with each other, but are doing so without being influenced by the economic, pressures of the global economic game that's being played elsewhere. And so why is it that in blockchain development we've decided actually globalism is great? Like we want to bring globalism to everyone everywhere. and we think that that's a good thing. When globalism has like pretty much like always showed that it's just capturable by economic interests of a few parties. Like maybe localism is like a much better thing for the crypto space to be trying to spread. And so local consensus is sort of exploring this. It's saying, what are the types of systems that we can develop that encourage local coordination without leaking NEV, so to speak, to a global game, and what are the properties of those systems need to have in order to be secure. It's a fascinating subject to go into. It touches on the concept of identity, the concept of public goods versus private goods, private property, all of these things that are sort of assumed to be a certain way because of the economic structures that we live in, can be challenged once you have more local games to play.
Do you think that this is a dissenting opinion largely, or do you think that this is something that people are moving towards? Like, because you could make some argument that L2s are like maybe Ethereum's iteration of L2s, right, are like some version of this, right? Like you have these different communities, like it's smaller consensus sets, if you will. But I'm still not sure that people will really like articulate it the way that you just did. Do you think that this is like, I like maybe just one other additional point I would make is like, I haven't heard many people in Ethereum or crypto at large say this the way that I think you just said this. Like, so maybe to me it is a bit of a dissenting opinion, but do you think more people are coming around to this idea or no?
I can tell you that it's not something that many people are actively talking about. And just recently, in the past few weeks, I've been having more conversation with folks about this. So sort of the core Ethereum research folks asking these questions. And I think we'll see more and more people thinking about them. I know I had a few conversations with Vitalik, and maybe it would make sense to do a podcast with him at some point that like looks into this, because he published also this post around like what's the difference between a sharded chain and like an L2 scaling roadmap, which kind of starts to look at this, right? Like you could see each roll up as being a local game by the people that like care about this roll up. Just like in like a sharded, blockchain, say you can look at each shard as being like a local game that is being resolved according to some consensus rules, and so it can get somewhat definitional at some point. And I think these are just conversations that are worth having more and more. I think that there's a lot about roll-ups today that aren't great, right? The whole like multi-sigs thing that like you can't fork because you don't know what to do with the like assets in the bridge, and like if you like don't do that, then like no one really is issuing like real assets on top of these roll-ups because they like can't trust the security model of it, blah blah blah. And so we're kind of like in this weird thing today where maybe roll-ups are like in theory a great thing, but in practice aren't exactly providing the guarantees that would really define them as local consensus. The other thing is, who the hell is running the sequencer question that like everyone's kind of hand waving. Is it just going to be the big block builders that are running the sequencers? It kind of seems like the answer is yes. And so are they really, a separate game, or are they just an extension of the global consensus game that's already being played, if the same actors are the ones that are in the economic position to be able to, set the rules and do the ordering?
Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
Yeah, I wanted to like jump back for a second. I'm oftentimes I'm all over the place on these things, so I do apologize. But you reminded me of a point I wanted to ask. Like with regard to, so we touched a little bit on like what was likely to occur with decentralization of builders. Like there was always likely going to be a relatively small number of builders that were building the vast majority of blocks. I want to ask though, like with regards to censorship, maybe, how do you view the current state of censorship, and is it getting better or worse in your opinion?
So yeah, the question of censorship, I haven't kept up with things, honestly, on like where the state of censorship resistance on Ethereum is. I do think that and a lot of these, like just from the global games basis, we can say that okay, let's take one step back and like try to discuss from like a fundamental perspective what is censorship, because I think even the idea that censorship is bad is one that's kind of like can be questioned. So as groups of humans that are like learning to live with other humans, we establish social norms, right? And these social norms could be like the way that you dress, the way that you talk, the things that you care about, the morals that you have as a group. And all of these things help define an in-group and an out-group, right? Like I can trust these sets of humans because they act as I do, they say as I do, and therefore I'm able to coordinate with them and do things. But again, an in-group implies an out-group, and that is a form of censorship. And so you can't have the idea of groups without some form of gatekeeping. It's just not possible. Otherwise, we would all be a part of the same group, and identity wouldn't even exist. If you want to like take it in one fundamental step further, like what is the difference between sort of an individual, as in like someone in a human body, versus like a group of people in all their like different human bodies, right? Like if there wasn't a difference between individuals, then individuality wouldn't exist itself. And so any concept of identity, any concept of coordination relies on some level of gatekeeping, because it's all just information processing. And you have information filters that allow you to focus on certain information over others and use those signals. And groups and clusters, if you take like a clustered network graph theory approach to this, naturally emerge from this network, from this information processing that takes place. So this is just like reframing a little bit the censorship question, because you can apply this to the group of humans that care about the Ethereum proof of stake consensus, right? And then the question that you ask is like, what are the rules that these groups of humans like, want to agree to? And then who is sort of responsible for imposing those rules on behalf of the group? What forces are those individuals exposed to? Well, there's kind of like the US government that like has a lot to say around economic censorship, right? And that's the whole sanctions regime and everything else, because they have a global system that cares about certain outcomes. So anyone that wants to interface with the group of humans that care about the US economic system needs to follow the rules of the US government. And so I think the censorship question is actually one of like, which groups are individuals deciding to be affiliated with, right? And those, what does that group as a collective decide are the rules of membership? So this is just like a little bit of like maybe metaphysical like theory around information processing and censorship. Practically speaking, for Ethereum, right? Like what is the set of rules that the group of people in Ethereum care about? Well, there's all kinds of tribalism that exists, right? And that's like some form of censorship. There's some ideas that like aren't able to be like propagated. But then there's like even more fundamental stuff, right? Which is, I think, that the debate that a lot of people have around censorship, which is, should it be possible for certain actors to prevent other actors from being able to put things on chain? And that's like a very narrow question, but the answer is like kind of in the protocol rules already, right? Like if someone is willing to pay to like have a position where they're able to exclude other people from the chain, that's part of the rules of the game as defined in the global consensus. And so I think the question of like, should censorship be possible is really one of like, does the Ethereum people, do they want to use a system that allows for individuals with outsized economic power to set, what goes into the next blocks. And so far the answer has been like, it seems to be the case that yes, right? Otherwise it would be like a coordination to like move away from this global consensus stuff, which we haven't seen.
So like maybe I'm making this a little bit more like detailed here, but like, for example, if you send a transaction from like an OFAC sanctioned wallet, like you will eventually get included in Ethereum block. Like, like somebody will pick up your transaction and you will be included. I think that the question like that I wonder is like the people who are actively paying effectively to exclude you, right? Like, are the economies of scale so great with these actors that we will converge on a point where it is, and I used this term before, I don't know if it's exactly the right framing, but like where it becomes like it's not costly for them to censor. And then like that's the equilibrium that I think like in my mind breaks if you have a block builder where they can exclude you consistently and not really be affected as a result. And so I think that
Oh, I have an even bigger mind fuck question.
Okay. I'm ready.
Which is, let's say you fast forward to a state where there's like 3 major dominant block builders and they all get routed order flow directly because people realize that they can get refunds on their priority fees because this block builder has a better view of the state of the world. And so therefore they're able to run the knapsack algorithm better and they're able to like price things. So everyone now outsources pricing power to these block builders, right? Then the question is, are block builders price setters or price takers? And I think that's the real mindfuck question. Because right now, our entire sort of model has assumed that block builders are price takers, right? They maximize for this MEV that they're able to extract from a block, and then they compete against each other to be able to get that landed on the chain. But if they're price setters, right, everyone's sending them transactions that are essentially blank checks that just say like, hey, I want to get included. How much do you want me to pay you for this? And they just start setting like arbitrary priority fees to like be able to like optimize their own margin. Like, what are the outcomes of this, right? Then you're not even like subsidizing you could call it censorship or whatever based off of your own willingness to pay. You're just like socializing that to all the order flow that's coming in, because you can just set the price for the next block if you have the highest aggregate willingness to pay of all the order flow that's coming in, which is a very, very, very trippy sort of market architecture to think about.
Okay, so yeah, going off that, like, what is your view then? Like, yeah, we can kind of maybe transition a bit into what you're building now. I think this is like not a bad time, but like, what was the takeaway that you saw, and you thought like, oh, like here's a practical solution, right? Like, and maybe this kind of moves increasingly towards like taking individualistic rights back, or however you want to call it, right? Like, what was your takeaway from some of these like mind games that you started playing in your own head, and then like where did you think that like maybe you could step in and like start to push this a certain direction?
So I mean, mind games is a good way to frame it. Like self buy-off 24/7. But a lot of these concepts were just like playing around in my head, and I started to try to think, okay, like what's the outcome of all of this? Well, one is, let's just assume that like these global consensus games end up being sort of controlled by like by a subset of actors. How do users sort of protect their own desires or rights or ability to coordinate in such a system? The other thing that I sort of spent a lot of time thinking about is like, where does the concept of scarcity come from with block space, right? There's kind of like this assumption that block space is scarce, and therefore like transaction fees like are high. But like, why is that a thing? And one of the things that sort of led me to is like global consensus is kind of like a unifying thing that's a problem here, right? Like we think that block space is scarce because we've designed this system where everyone in the world that uses the system has to stop to like verify that Gwart's transaction has like successfully validated. Gwart paid for his coffee, and now the entire network agrees that he did that, and he didn't like double spend it. And so after that's done, then we can move to Stephane's transaction, and then we can go to the next one, right? But that's just like a global consensus thing, right? That isn't necessarily required. And so there's like a huge amount of this cost or block space scarcity that's just tied to the concept of global consensus. And so if we just take a view that there's going to be more and more roll-ups, for example, to be able to like create more of these local games, what's the extreme version of this? Where does this like completely lead to? And as far as I can tell, it's that every account becomes its own rollup. Every asset becomes its own rollup. Every application becomes its own rollup. So every single one of these things will kind of have its own rules, right? It'll be its own game that's being played. That's completely isolated from global consensus by default, but can bridge into the global consensus, or in this many cases, not even the global consensus, but just bridge into an association set of other individuals that are trying to operate some kind of outcome. And so very quickly, you kind of shift this mindset from this globalistic, we need like one system that everyone like operates into, to one that's like, oh no, actually, if we give individuals the ability to go and plug into all the different things that they need to, you can build like extremely scalable systems that protects like individual rights. That say like I can go and coordinate with Gwart directly and get a transaction done without needing to notify the entire rest of the world. And so the question that we asked ourselves is like, what's missing? What's missing from being able to enable that to take place? And the answer that we came to is this thing that we call OneBalance or credible accounts. And so these credible accounts are effectively just ways for individuals to make commitments to other individuals directly from an account without relying on a global consensus blockchain to enforce those commitments. And that's the entire thesis behind OneBalance.
Okay, so like give a very like rudimentary overview. Explain like I'm five. Like, okay, so maybe first of all, when you say roll up, like every wallet becomes its own roll up. Can you explain that in like maybe a little bit simpler terms? Like it becomes its own smart contract wallet effectively, in the same way that like roll ups are viewed by the L1 as smart contracts. Like, is this the essence of it?
It doesn't have to have a smart contract on it. So think of your external account. Okay. Your external account by default has like an address on every EVM chain, right? But you can't manage it all from your external account. You have to go to the chain and like do something there and pay like gas and like whatever it is. But just imagine that like you took the state from all that you control on all these different chains, and then you deposited that into a roll-up that you're able to communicate with yourself. And the only thing that this rollup does is it sequences locks over your state. So it says, okay, Gwart has 10 USDC on base, right? And he wants to buy NFT that's traded on Solana. This is even more of a complex. Let's just say like an NFT traded on like Blast or something, right? Like, so it's both like EVM things. Typically, like the way that you would think about doing this is like, okay, you need to like find a bridge somewhere that's going to be able to like transfer USDC from base to Blast, and then you need to like figure out how to pay for gas on Blast, and then you like send a transaction through like the NFT marketplace that's there to be able to like now have it in your Blast account, right? But if you have this like aggregated state from all the different rollups, really all it says is on your accounts you have 10 USDC that happens to be on base. You issue a lock that says, if I receive the NFT that I want in my account, then you can get access to these this 10 USDC. And so now anyone in the world can sort of say like, oh, I'm willing to take the other side of that trade. I'll Gwart, I'll go get you your NFT and give it to you. I can tell that you're going to pay me because you issued this lock over the state that you're not able to do anything else with. And so there's a mechanism somewhere that's enforcing that if I give you this NFT, you're going to pay me. And that's all I need to know. Now I can go figure out which bridge I'm going to use, go figure out how to like get the actual NFT from the platform. So long as I deposit it into your account, I'm going to get compensated, and you're going to get the execution that you want. And so that's the like really cool part about these like accounts as rollups is you don't actually need to interface with any other chain. You just need to issue locks over the state that you control, and condition how it gets resolved based off of some state transition that happens somewhere else.
Who needs to integrate with this? Like, do chains individually, right? Like we have these like a bunch of different L2s right now. Like, how are they integrating with this? Is this like, what's the term? Like a messaging layer more so? Is that like how you would describe this versus, like a proper bridge?
This is an account model. So maybe I'll share my screen again, and that will help. Because I think like these are the questions a lot of people get confused about, and they sort of think about it for like a couple seconds. They're like, this doesn't fit into my existing like mental models. Like, I don't want to think about this anymore. So let's see if I'm able to elucidate this a little bit. So what is a credible account? A credible account just says, this is an external account at the top, right? The account sits outside of the blockchain, and the blockchain has the ability to enforce commitments and has global consensus. And then a credible account just says, oh, actually, you don't need the global consensus. You can just have the ability to make credible commitments tied directly to the account. And the best way to think about this is just a rollup, an account inside of a rollup. So we have this idea of resource locks, which is what I described. Practically, like what actually is an account? It could be just an external account, like an EOA key, like people are used to using with like MetaMask or whatever. It could be a smart account, like a safe, or like any of the 4337 stuff that's being developed. Or it could be like one of these like more new age, stateful accounts like 7702, right? It doesn't really matter. Like all of these things are just interfaces at the end of the day. They don't specify where these accounts live. All that we're saying is like you need to have a module attached to these that allow them to make credible commitments. And that's the part that like creates all this magic, is like this module that you attach to it. Not like where these accounts live or what is the interface that they support. What this ends up looking like, to your question, like who actually needs to implement this. So this is like the stack. Previously we could have mapped this as being like the MEV supply chain, right? From like top to bottom. This is a stack because it's cake and everyone likes cake, and that's like a fun thing to have. And so this is what it looks like. Every single party here has a role to play to make credible accounts work. So the apps need to like interface through like an SDK that needs to be updated to be able to support the new methods that are required, the new JSON RPC API that's required. Wallets and wallet as a service companies need to figure out how to expose this to their end users because it's a new usage pattern that they need to provide. You need these providers of credible commitment machines are actually issuing these accounts and securing them, which is what OneBalance is providing. You need all the solver networks, right, that are providing the actual execution. So this is like, you could call them block builders, you could call them like intent bridges, you call them order flow auctions. These are all just sort of solver networks that are providing the execution on multi-chain setting. You need Oracle providers. You need folks that are proving that the state transitions that were requested are actually executed on the destination chains. You need actual chains for like settlement, right? And then you need providers that are able to like surface all of this information back towards the application in a way that the application is able to understand. So what I'm sort of proposing is like basically taking all of Web3 and turning it on its head, and saying like, this is like a completely new way to do things. Practically speaking, it's like not that big of a lift, surprisingly enough, because you can just wrap all the existing account models and then implement the interfaces inside of like the SDKs that everyone uses already, Ethers, VM, Web3.js. And then it's just like a version bump for all these folks. They just version bump the SDK that they use to interact with the chain. And then all of a sudden they're using all this behind the scenes. And all these things are like, standard interfaces. And, we have a bunch of partners that are working with us in making it happen. But to the application developers, it ends up actually being quite a simple change.
Okay, so since this is something I know a little bit more about, how would you compare this to like the future that some people want of shared sequencers, for example? Is this like something that's sort of puts that to the side altogether and says, we don't need these like sidecars effectively that are running to provide execution here and deliver here or whatever. Like, how would you, does this sit alongside a shared sequencer? And I saw the like solver aspect in there. So I'm curious, like, is this a better version of shared sequencing? By the way, I should give some context. I'm not particularly bullish on shared sequencing yet myself. So that's why I have a slight bias there. But I'm curious, like, maybe that would provide like a little bit of like clarity in my mind.
Yeah. So there's like a few different like other topics that are being tossed around the space right now. So there's obviously all the account abstraction stuff. Now there's like the 7702 stuff. That's like one camp that's like sort of focusing on the account abstraction stuff. Then we have like more of the base layer. You could call it like the Justin Drake camp with like all the like base sequencing, like shared sequencing, pre-commitments, these kinds of things. And then we sort of have the like shared sequencers that like gravitate towards that. And then on the shared sequencer camp, we also have like ag layer, and we have like the ZK sync equivalent of it. And so how do we cluster all these different things, right? So I would say that the account abstraction folks are really focused on adding programmability into accounts. Okay. That's what it does. The credible account folks, so OneBalance, we're focused on giving accounts the ability to make credible commitments. And the question is to who, but let's just put on a pause on that. The shared sequencer ag layer stuff are chains making commitments, and the pre-commitment stuff and the base sequencing and all of this are validators making commitments. So all of these things are kind of certain entities making commitments to other entities. And the question is, for those other entities, my answer is solvers. So all these entities have some kind of like piece of the puzzle, whether it's like sequencing rights or proof aggregation or transaction origination. And they are trying to reduce the risk that solvers have to carry to bring a state transition to the chain. So they're all mechanisms to help solvers manage their execution risk. And by solvers managing their execution risk, they're able to be more reliable, be more cost efficient, and be less sophisticated. And so it's all just an attempt to say like the block builder role like doesn't need to be as extremely sophisticated or centralized or big, because there's like much more tools that are proposed by or offered by each of these components to reduce the job that it has. So it's different than all of these things, but it sort of aims to achieve the same thing, which is to reduce solver risk.
When you say that you think that they can be less sophisticated actors, like if you were to view, well, first of all, maybe like when I think solver, I just think like some version of a market maker, right? Like at least in the current iteration. What is then like the long run of a solver that's not Wintermute or SCP?
Yeah. I just want like the reason why like CeFi DeFi arbitrage firms are like block builders today is because of Uniswap, right? Like if Uniswap didn't exist on Ethereum, it wouldn't make sense for these firms to be doing this, really. And so I think that's like one thing that's like important to keep in mind, which is like the nature of the actors that are playing the game is going to be different depending on the game that's being played. And so, the question is like in this like future state, are the actors still going to be market makers, or are they going to be different actors? I think there's like a few, we can reason about this again from first principles a little bit, which is what are market makers good at that like other solvers are perhaps not as good at? Well, one, they have cheap access to inventory, particularly in shitcoins if they're doing like market making deal for like protocols, right? And then two, they have predictive modeling abilities over future volatility, right? So they have that. And then maybe you could say three is like access, right? They have like low latency connection with like higher fee tiers on like, places where prices are being determined. So, you could sort of model as these three things. And so the question of like, are these games also just going to be played by market makers is like, is there still an advantage of having these three things to participate in the game. And I think that's probably the way to frame the question. I don't know for sure. There's so many different paths in which the world can evolve here. But whenever we sort of have a fork in the road, we can kind of say, like, does this benefit the parties that have inventory access and predictive models, or does it like not advantage them in some way?
Yeah, that Uniswap comment was interesting, like, because it's pretty straightforward, right? Like, the reason that the block builders have such high economies of scale is because there's like so much volume on Uniswap, right? But like, so I'm curious, like, well, first of all,
it's also changing, which is interesting, right? Like, again, to say like the game's always changing. Increasingly now it's about having private order flow, right? All the Telegram bots that have like really soft orders that are overpaying for block space. Now the game is kind of like, how do I, maximize my revenues while like aggregating as many possible sources of order flow as possible.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting. I'll skip to that question now that I think about it. Like, how do you feel about private order flow? I mean, maybe it's an inevitability. I think a lot of people would like probably contend this, and it probably, at least in certain areas of the stack, it is. But I'm just interested to like hear your, now, like, you can go on one of your metaphysical diatribes. Yes, I didn't want to say that, but yeah, you can just start rambling maybe about like, how do you feel about this, like, philosophically, like, from what we're trying to do to what may be developing in practice, right? Like, is this, I mean, users may oftentimes get better execution when there's like private order flow deals. Like, this is, this is almost undeniable. We can see this in TradFi. I'm curious, like, though, from the perspective of trying to build a decentralized financial system, if like this is a positive outcome in your mind, inevitable, any thoughts you have? Start rambling.
Yeah. I surprisingly, maybe I actually don't have that many strong opinions here. Like, some of the folks I would point to, so the Fastlane guy, Thorgard Alex Watts, he's very fundamentalist in this, where he believes like everything should be public. And he's designed a system for Polygon that forces all the order flow to be routed publicly.
Right.
And he sort of fundamentally believes that improves the guarantees that the system has to offer. Now, do I agree with him? Do I not? I don't know. I observed that the system that he's built and the people on Polygon seem to be happy about it. Right.
Yeah.
And so, maybe there's design for games that are able to maintain order flow public that would also make the Ethereum people happy. Is there, fundamental economic reasons why that would not work on Ethereum? I haven't looked enough at the system design.
I think, well, I've actually, like, I've sort of had this conversation with Alex, and he's conceded yes. I mean, like, he has, I think, basically done away with sandwiches on Polygon. But yes, of course, like, Polygon validators all opt into this, right? Like, so it's much different when, you're working with a smaller subset of validators, and getting them.
There's not that many validators on Ethereum.
That's okay. Well, that's not something that I'm going to say, but you can say that.
Yeah, I mean, the number of validators on Ethereum is probably not that much different than Polygon.
Do you
Maybe
think
this is a really controversial topic, but I don't know.
I mean, that would get a lot of like that. That will definitely get a lot of feedback, right? Because I mean, especially when you like even like Lido people, for example, will point to just the number of validators under the validator set as a whole, and I don't have like very strong opinions.
Like whatever rules that they want to play as a they're essentially like what's a nice way, they're a group, right?
They're an umbrella, right? Yeah,
they're an association of individuals that agree to operate under a certain set of rules, right?
Yeah.
And so the rules that they agree to operate under is kind of like up to their governance to figure out, but they can certainly pick whatever rules that they want. And like, there's, this is kind of like the truth. It's always been the truth. There's like much less than 5% of the entire network that's run by solo operators. So, like, yeah, they could all choose to operate under a different model than.
Yeah. Well, that's actually kind of an interesting point. Like, also, I mean, recently we saw Solana Foundation is no longer delegating stake to validators at Sandwich. And I mean, there's a lot of pushback on this from like Ethereum people on Twitter saying like, Solana Foundation controls a lot of the say, and the reality is like, look, I mean, I don't have like strong bias here, right? But like I look at this, I'm like, look, if you're gonna borrow money from the Solana Foundation and they say you can't sandwich, like it's not your money really. Now, once again, I don't think like Ethereum Foundation is not giving out grants in the same way that the Solana Foundation is, but Lido could do something similar.
They gave out really big grants to all the consensus client developers.
Yeah, that's a good point. So like, all right, this is good gossip, but let me ask then, like, do you think it's reasonable for Lido, like just like I'll throw out a vanilla case, like do you think it's reasonable for Lido to say like, we don't want to interact with entities that sandwich, right? And then maybe this isn't exact, like, right, there's some, like, it's a little bit convoluted with PBS, but like, is that a reasonable social norm in your opinion? Or is that attempting to like configure around what should be like an adversarial environment?
Once you start from the like first principle that all these are just social rules, like every system that's ever been designed in crypto is just a bunch of humans agreeing with other humans over a set of rules, then you realize that actually like these social norms are just like, they're super arbitrary. And it could be anything. So I think the bigger question is like, what's like, what would be the coordination required to get the shift to take place, right? Such that like, if Lido was to decide this, like they wouldn't just like lose a bunch of their stake. And like, the next liquid staking guy is going to come and say like, we are Lido, but we make you more money. And then like, come around and optimize in another way. I don't know the answer to that question. Like, how do you navigate the political, alignment game to get a different social consensus?
Okay. So then like, let's kind of like, we've discussed some of the, well, we kind of like pivoted back to L1 stuff, but now let's like come back to like OneBalance and like your project. Like I want to try to like tie in where you see like the big unlocks, right? With like this, like with your project or like the direction that you're moving and like the direction that you're thinking we're going to move. Like where are the big unlocks for users? Like we're not getting sandwiched anymore. Like lower transaction fees with plentiful block space. Like where do you see like the big, 0 to 1s or whatever like Silicon Valley term you want to use?
Yeah. So I think the scalability thing is an interesting one, right? Maybe it isn't felt immediately, but the end result is like you never really have to. The intermediary step is you always execute at the speed and cost of your destination chain, not of your origin chain. And so, despite all your funds being on Ethereum, you can get transactions done at the speed of Solana. Your assets are still secured by Ethereum, but you're transacting at the speed of Solana. Okay, that's like one big unlock. Another one is like you never have to like do bridging ever again, because that's the solver's job. That's not your job. Your job is to like figure out what you want to do and like do it, and then the rest of the world's job is to figure out how to get it done. And so the fact that like users have had to figure out how to do things is kind of like weird, and like very like clearly just a signal of like the immature state of our ecosystem. So yeah, it's just like users can just do things as opposed to like figuring out how to do them. The example is like, imagine you're able to just like talk to your, the ChatGPT and have ChatGPT execute stuff on chain for you, in a fully non-custodial way. That's kind of like the experience that ultimately we enable. From like an MEV perspective, there's like, if you're only interacting with other individuals instead of interacting with like global consensus, you can implement a lot of really cool mechanisms. It's effectively like opening up state channels with other parties and transacting on a peer-to-peer manner rather than on a peer to global consensus chain manner. And so you expose a lot less MEV. You can build all kind of like interesting local games on top of this. So you can probably build some AMMs. You can probably build lending pools. You can probably build, even RFQ mechanisms inside of these kinds of things. We sort of put out this post that tries to like highlight some of the UX improvement. Maybe it makes sense to share that and play it. because I think it's sort of, I like to also, again, one of these metaphysical diatribes maybe, do an analogy between geocentric worldview and heliocentric worldview, right? For like a really long time, humans used to think that the sun went around Earth, right? And we built all these complex models of physics that sort of justified it. And then at some point, some guy called Copernicus came around and said, "Oh, guys, actually, I think the Earth is going around the sun." And then everyone was like, "No, blasphemy! That's like not the right way to see the world." And then more and more people were like, "Oh shit! Like it kind of makes sense." And you realize that you can build a lot more sophisticated models and like a much more accurate view of reality. I think the same thing is happening between like chain centricism versus account centricism. So more and more people are going to realize that actually focusing on the account is like what actually matters, because that's where like things are originating from. That's where like people are trying to do things. And like how do you service accounts is actually the right way to think about things. But anyways, let's look at this quickly, which is this post that we have. This just says like you can buy an NFT with like your balance on any chain, right? So you can pay with Bitcoin. You can pay for gas fees with Bitcoin, with like Bitcoin that lives on Bitcoin, right? You can pay up for gas fees on any L2. You can buy anything. You can do anything on any of the L2s using this thing. And all the swapping happens behind the scenes because at the end of the day, you're just transacting with a solver. So you can use any asset to do anything that you want. You can do like super like advanced conditional trades, right? So you can say like, I'm going to condition based off of like Elon Musk tweeting to like do a trade, and then in a fully like non-custodial way, so long as you have an oracle that's able to like trustlessly provide like a feed of the tweets, you can have it like do trades on chain with it. I think this is one that's kind of like underrated, which is like actually like sophisticated permissioning. We're seeing more work around session keys, which I think is like a step in the right direction. But we've lived in this world where it's like either you have to approve every single state transition using your MetaMask, or you have to extract your seed phrase and give it to a Telegram bot. And that's kind of like your two options. Whereas here we're saying like, oh no, actually you can like have arbitrary programmable permissions that are enforced across all the different chains that you want to operate against. You can even have like a DAO that controls a wallet, which is hilarious, right? You could have like a DAO that does like transactions on Bitcoin. And yeah, I mean, the main thing to say about all of this is that it's achieved in a non-custodial way, right? Like all these things would be easy to do if it was just about having like some counterparty that's doing it. But achieving it in a non-custodial way is what's really exciting about it.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna pry on this, but since you brought it up, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Like, if you followed any like the Bitcoin L2 stuff, and if I don't know, just like any thoughts on Bitcoin. I mean, it seems like I haven't seen many wallets where you can like interact with Bitcoin and other chains. Like obviously, like EVM has typically been easier, but yeah, if you have thoughts on like Bitcoin ecosystem or anything you're seeing develop that's of interest to you.
Yeah, the Bitcoin stuff is something I've always like. I was big on Bitcoin L2s like a couple of years ago, just from the idea that like if you're just looking for the most decentralized place to store data, like probably Bitcoin is the right one. Like I don't think that any other like data availability solutions like really offer you the same. But that seems to be somewhat different from like the reason why people are excited about Bitcoin L2s today, which seems to be that like they just want to use Bitcoins to do stuff, to like pay for stuff, and like you don't actually need Bitcoin L2s to do that. Like you can use your Bitcoin to like spend on L2s that are on a different system, and that seems to be like more exciting to me at least. So yeah, with something like OneBalance, right, you could use Bitcoin, and you can use it on Arbitrum, you can use it on Blast, you can use it on Base, you can like pay for stuff on Base, you can pay for stuff on Solana using it. And that's pretty cool. Yeah, I think maybe there's like some people that care about scaling Bitcoin through L2s. But I don't know that any of the L2s that are being proposed now are actually doing that in a non-custodial way. And like one maybe piece of advice there would be like, if that's really the goal, like you probably don't want to do smart contracts. because smart contracts introduce these like global consensus problems with, MEV and everything else. Whereas, and then you like very quickly end up in this like shared sequencer nightmare for Bitcoin as well. Whereas if you just do like state channels with like, payments, but you don't have the same issues on bootstrapping the liquidity for it, you can probably scale in a little bit of a better way. So, I haven't spent much time trying to design these things. I just kind of have like outside observations over what the space seems to be trending towards.
Yeah, that's like fascinating to hear that as somebody who's been like absolutely in the weeds on Ethereum, right? For like the past 10 years, I don't know, right? Like, and somebody who's been at the forefront of this. It's quite interesting because there's a lot of push for like roll-ups and like similar functionality. And it's interesting to hear it come from somebody like you who's like, look, like we've done. And also like, there is like some kind of interesting question as to whether or not like, maybe if you are going to do that stuff, like why not just do it on something like OneBalance, right? Like why not just use another chain? Now, like Bitcoiners will have some reservations about me saying that, right? But like I tend to like probably lean more towards what you just said with regards to like state channels. And I mean, there's probably more functionality that we need or would hope for, but yeah, like just hacking on a bunch of EVMs and like rollups, like it's not so immediately clear to me that's like that useful. But I think we'll see, like it's obviously something that people are gung ho about right now, but like, none of them are real rollups. And it's not even like Ethereum where they're not real rollups, but they could be. It's like, they're not real. They're not real rollups and they can't be, right? Like you can like make the multi-sig like distributed blah, blah, blah. But like in reality, it's not really feasible yet. So
it's a proof of authority bridge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I do think like if you're a Bitcoiner and you're just like, I want to like do like speculation over shitcoins using my Bitcoins, then like something like OneBalance is really great. If you're like a Bitcoiner and you're like, I really want to scale Bitcoin in like the most like non-custodial, censorship resistant manner, blah, 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 then I think maybe you can like borrow some concepts from OneBalance, but OneBalance itself isn't the solution there.
Yeah, I'm on board with that answer. Okay. I got one last question for you. Actually, it's two. I do this all the time. Like I say, I have one question that I end up asking people 3 questions, and like my friend Uri Klarman, he gets like very upset about this. He's like, you got to ask one question at a time. So I'll ask 2 questions here. What is your like 10-year vision for crypto? Like, where are we? Like, what have we achieved in 10 years?
I think my goal is to help the space transition towards local consensus blockchains. So whether hopefully it's Ethereum is able to adapt its consensus to be more in this direction. But I do think that there's like a fundamental shift that's required here that OneBalance is like a step towards it. What that actually means is like it's useful to like a larger number of people. And if we have like 1 billion people using blockchains every day without knowing that they're using it, then that's a success. And if we have a way to design these things such that we are not sort of oppressive in enforcing group norms on these people, but we're allowing these people to bring their own set of beliefs and rules that they want to follow with their own groups, then it'll have been a force for good. So yeah, that's my very simple goal, I suppose.
Stefan, thank you so much for coming on. I think we hit on a lot of points. I thought it was really good. It was interesting. And good luck. Where can people find you?
OneBalance.io.
Okay. And then also if you want to shill Frontier and Alfred as well, take the opportunity. Yeah.
I mean, Frontier is building like a ton of cool stuff all the time. If you want to read the research articles, go to frontier.tech. But yeah, my baby now, I'm on my OneBalance arc. And so my OneBalance arc is OneBalance.io, and then I'm at the Ghost Step on Twitter. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. It was fun.